Muted.
To the R3 Architecture Working Group, and the first time we've opened this up to the whole Corda community, partners, developers, and beyond. So I can see a lot of you dialed in, so welcome, and hope this will be the first of many that you find useful. For this first week, the non-R3 members, we've just given you the dial-in to make it easier. From next fortnight, so from 2 weeks from now, we'll be giving a whole go-to-webinar for everybody, so everyone can get in and see the slides. But for those of you who are just dialed in on voice, if you go to corda.net/awg, you can download the presentation, and I'll tell you which page we're on as we go. If we go to slide 1, so it's the second slide, but titled slide 1, I'll just take you through what we're going to be covering, and then we'll get into the content. So first of all, welcome from me, and welcome again. Thanks to all of you who have joined. For those who are new, there's a regular flow to these calls. First of all, we give you headlines from what's going on in R3 in the broader Corda community. We'll then ask Mike Ward, who's our head of product management and marketing, to give an update on our first Corda Conference, which will be held in London in September and open to the whole community, and it will be free. So he'll give us introduction to that. We'll then get our regular update on Corda development and futures from Mike Hearn. And then we have our head of developer relations, Roger Willis, giving us an update on a new feature that went in the last milestone that we've had some questions about. So he'll take us into some detail on that. And then the bulk of this session will be focused on the R3 test network. We have information from me on what this thing is and why we built it, and how we'll be making a version available to the broader community, but also how that ties to our vision for production networks in the future. And we have a guest from Thomson Reuters, Mark Rains, who'll be talking about a specific oracle that Thomson Reuters have made available on the testnet, and that will be available to the broader community when the community network is stood up. So a lot to get through. So I'll jump straight in. For those of you who need to ask or would like to ask questions, members, there's the chat window and GoToMeeting, and for everybody, if you press *6, that will take you off mute, and you can ask questions. Feel free to interrupt, but we'll also stop the questions as we go. So the third slide in the deck, page 2, headlines from R3. There we go again. Headlines from R3. So I've already welcomed everybody to the Corda Architecture Working Group. As you'll see, this call is primarily broadcast is to bring everyone up to speed with what's going on. But as I've said, please do ask questions. The bulk of our work and design, as you all know, happens on our Slack and on Discourse. We enjoy working with you there. As I said, the world's first Corda Conference will be in September. Michael Ward will talk about that. From the perspective of the dev team, all our focus right now is Corda milestone 14. The first cut of that was done earlier this week, and we're now in testing and bug fixing to be able to get milestone 14 out in the coming days, probably next week. And that's part of our countdown to Corda 1.0. We're targeting Corda milestone M16 as the 1.0 release, the point at which the Corda API gets stabilized as in it stops changing, and so apps will continue to work as we upgrade beyond then. So we're getting into the home straights now for Corda 1.0. And then the final point is one I will talk about a bit later. Our plan to make make a version of our testnet available to the community as well, so you can test your apps and interact with oracles and other services that we're building out. So with that, let me hand over to Mike Ward to talk about the forthcoming Corda Conference, which is for slide number 3.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. So first off, I should make sure you can hear me, but if you can't, I anticipate somebody will say something then.
We can.
Thanks, Richard. So I just want to very briefly about our first conference from the Corda team, which is CordaCon, and that is September 12th in London. So this is a moment to block your calendar, take a brief moment, switch over to your calendar and block out that date, and please join us. So this is our first technical conference. For the members who were in New York for our last members conference, you would have been at our hackathon. So we're building on that same concept. We take our community very seriously, obviously. So we're doing as much as possible to continue to reach out to you all. This is a really good chance to come and meet us in person. So meet the people who are behind the keyboard actually making Corda today. So we'd welcome the chance to meet all of you in person. So it is an all-day session. We're working through some presenters still. We have our internal presenters obviously lined up. You can see the agenda tentatively down below. We're working on an exciting keynote speaker, so we'll update you on that. It is a technical session, so this is truly a conference being developed straight out of our engineering team. So we're trying to keep it as relevant as possible for a technical audience. So really kind of building on the same concepts you get out of the architecture working group today. So bring your laptop. We want you to bring your laptop because we'll have some USBs to get you set up, get Corda up and running on your machine, and then hopefully we'll have some interactive things you can do throughout the day to kind of follow along and actually see how things work, so you can leave not only with good ideas, but some things working. So again, mark your calendars, September 12th in London. You can go to corda.net. Unfortunately, we don't have a simple URL yet for you to register, but go to corda.net. We'll have more specifics up there very shortly where you can register. So it will be limited in capacity, so we would encourage you to jump up there, check it out, and register as soon as you can. So back to you. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so let's move straight on from Mike Ward to Mike Hearn. So we're now on PDF page 5, labeled for Corda update, for an update on what's been going on in the code base in the last few weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Right, so for those of you who's the first AWG, I always do this. I just go over briefly what we've been working on since the last, and as it's a bi-weekly call, that's always 2 weeks of work. Then usually other people who have members of the team who have been working on specific features go in and talk a little bit about 1 or 2 different things. So this is an overview. You can get the same information, of course, by just looking at what pull requests have been merged on public GitHub. So, because this is about the open source code base in this slide. So we are still heading as fast as we can towards API stability. As part of that, we've been reviewing the current public API. We've been moving things out of it in many cases where we didn't want to make a long-term commitment to it. Sometimes, for example, small utilities we've added in some parts of development later became unused, or we decided we didn't want to keep them. We've been doing things like separating the cache app out from the core, which is now largely complete. This is necessary because as Corda evolved, the early stages, of course, it was a single code base, and we spent our time experimenting with the core design and with the ideas. And then later on, we've been separating out some of the apps we developed in this time to ensure that there's a clean separation between the platform and even core financial concepts like cache. The core of Corda itself is not finance specific. We've been making some changes which are not completely API oriented, but they're looking towards writing a specification for the wire format in future. So we've been redesigning how notary change transactions are represented as types and things like that. So we're making things simpler, tighter, more secure, removing some problematic edges on the design of transactions. And we've started deciding which subset of Java will be allowed in smart contracts. So up until now, smart contracts code, well, it is still the case in M14, but up until now, we've been allowing you to do basically anything inside a verify method. That is not and has never been the plan. We are effectively doing things like deleting random number generators from this deterministic Java subset and a few other things like that. This is happening also in public on a different repository. So we've got a fork of the OpenJDK repository where we're doing this work. So you can see that subset being defined now. It's still going to be pretty big, though, so don't worry, right? We're not giving a completely crippled Java by any means. But some things like opening files, opening network sockets should not be done inside a verify method, and we are finally nailing down exactly what is and isn't allowed. Finally, we've also been making some changes to make things more secure. This is to some extent API related, but it's also work needed to prepare for a security audit, right? We have to fix the problems we know about before going into audit. We've virtually almost finished confidential identities. I've talked about what that feature is in past AWG sessions, so I won't go over it again. And finally, we're doing some work on Corda dependencies and dependency management, and in particular, implementing some of it, but also setting out a roadmap for how this integrates with Java 9's Jigsaw module system. Now, we're not going to talk about the latter point today, but the current approach we're adopting is a topic that will be handled next. So I'd like to pass back to Richard, and you can take us on to the next slides.
Thanks, Olo. Not so quick. I'm going to actually thanks, Mike. I'm going to pause for a second or so just to see if anybody has any questions or comments on that. And this is a great opportunity to hear directly from the team on anything you're interested in. It's *6 to come off mute, and I'll pause for about 20 seconds to give you time. Excellent. You've had long enough to ask your questions, so everybody must be entirely confident and clear on where we're going. So that's good to know. So we'll move on to the next section, which is Roger Willis, our head of developer relations, with an update on a new feature in Corda. So this is the slide titled Corda Feature Update.
So thank you, Richard. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Roger Willis, the developer relations lead at R3. So it's my job to act as the, I guess, lead evangelist and advocate for those using Corda. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Corda app jar format. So I'm sure all of you know that Corda is a platform, and then of course on top of the platform, developers can build applications. And what we've done in some recent work, which was included in the last milestone release, is nail down that application specification. Now, as you all know, there's a multitude of work done on various Corda features, and certainly in the run-up to V1, there's a lot of extra features going into the code base. Some gain more attention than others. For example, the groundbreaking work that we've been doing with Intel SGX. However, there's a lot of work that also goes on behind the scenes to get Corda ready for version 1 at the end of September. And as I said, part of that work involves finalizing this Corda app jar format and how one can specify Corda app dependencies in your project. So there was an issue, or I guess our initial approach, which grew organically, wasn't as optimal as we'd liked. So one of our developers, Clinton Alexander, has been working on this for the past month or so. And the main reason why we had to make the changes is because manual dependency management in Corda was a bit tedious, and it didn't really work so well. So if we move to the next slide, I can just go into a little bit of detail about what the previous state was. So you can see here there's a directory structure from my Apple Mac. We can see that what I've done here is I've built 3 Corda nodes, Alice, Bob, and the controller, using the Gradle deploy nodes task. So what that does is it builds all of your Corda apps and deploys a Corda node, embedding the Corda app in each one of those nodes. So you can see I've got the Alice folder open, and there's a bunch of directories in there. You can see in there's a Corda jar. Now that's a fat jar with, and that means it's got all of the Corda jars as well as all of the dependencies in there. And then you can see that there are 2 other folders. One of them is called dependencies, and the other one is called plugins. Now, plugins is where the jars for your Corda app goes. And notably, at this stage, it was just the code for your Corda app, so none of the dependencies. Now, in the dependencies folder, all of the dependencies for all of the Corda apps in that particular node were dumped. And you can see there's actually a bit of duplication. So the core Corda libraries, which your Corda app depends on, were also dependencies, and that didn't necessarily need to be the case. And also there could have been a couple of issues going forward with this approach, whereby if you had the same dependency but different version numbers passed between different Corda apps, then depending on which one was class loaded first, there may have been a version issue there if those libraries weren't backwards compatible. So if we go to the next slide, we have the new approach. So what we have now is in fact two class loaders. We have the Corda, which is loaded by the default class loader. Unfortunately, some of the text on there hasn't come out so well, but you can see in the diagram on the left-hand side, we've got a box for the Corda fat jar, and then we have a circle underneath it which contains all of the dependency jars. So they're all included inside the fat jar. And now, instead of your Corda apps just containing your Corda app code, they're now fact jars, and they contain also all of the external dependencies, as well as all the transitive dependencies as well. And those are all, I guess, the class loaded in a separate realm with a separate class loader. So that way there's more a coherent approach to the dependency management going on. And we can also see here that there's two Corda apps, Corda A and Corda B, and we can see that Corda A depends on Corda B, and they can both have their own pool, in effect, of dependencies. And likewise, you can see on the diagram, I've noted a potential library, Apache Commons Collections 321 in Corda, and then there's a separate version in the external dependencies for Corda A, and this doesn't pose a problem with this approach, whereas it would do with the previous approach. So that is, in essence, the work that Clinton's been doing over the past couple of weeks, and I believe Clinton's on the line, actually. So if anyone does have any questions, then either myself or Clinton can take them. So thanks for listening.
It's *6 to come off mute if you have any questions for Roger or for Clinton. Cool. Okay. So let's move on to the next section, Testnet. So this will be the bulk of today's session, because there's actually quite a lot going on, and a lot to update both members and our broader community on. So for those following along, we're on the slide titled "Deep Dive on Testnet." So first, before we get into this slide, just a bit of I guess a bit of context and an observation. So for those of you familiar with the public blockchain world, whether back in the early days or even the current days of Bitcoin or Ethereum, there's always been a concept of a test network where new platform features can be trialed or experimented with, or people building applications can test them in a low risk manner, so they don't there's no danger of them losing money. But the thing that of course unites those platforms and distinguishes them from the world of enterprise blockchains, the world that we're in, of course, is that they're open access. There's no concept of permissioning. Anyone can connect, anyone can join, anyone can participate. But of course, for the types of problems we're trying to solve with Corda, that's not appropriate. We need to know with whom we're transacting. In Corda, as everybody knows, we're trying to model, or one of the main things we're trying to model are legal agreements between parties. But we need to know who we're connected to. We need to know that if we think we're sending a message to Bob, it really is Bob, and so forth. And so the idea of a public test network is quite a difficult concept to grapple with. But nevertheless, having independent custom-built networks for each individual application is in my view, the road to madness. If you had to build a completely separate private blockchain network for each different use case, we'd end up in the same state the industry, the financial industry finds it in today, which is lots of non-interoperable, disconnected applications, rather than an open ecosystem of collaborating firms and applications. So we spent some considerable time in the design of Corda to make sure that multiple applications running on Corda networks can interoperate and connect to each other. And then what we've been doing on the network side over the last year is building out a test network, so a long-lived general-purpose permissioned test network of Corda nodes, so that people who are building applications or trialing applications can run them on their nodes with their counterparts or the firms with whom they're transacting, and they can trial them without having to spin up and shut down a separate network each and every time. And that's what the Corda test network is. As you'd expect, we began with the R3 membership, but what I'll be talking about in the next few charts is the two directions we plan to take this. One is how we take the test network we already have and use that to learn more and get us closer to a full production network. And the second thing is our plans to create a version of this test network for the broader community, so you can use this to connect to each other, test transactions with each other, and access the broad ecosystem that we're creating. So this chart summarizes the idea. So Testnet is intended to be a vehicle for collaboration, so participants can collaborate on projects and POCs with R3 available to help both from a technical perspective, getting you up and running, but also to guide and even provide hosting where required. And that's up and running for our membership at the moment. And as I say, there'll be a version for the broader community soon. But we find it's also a really useful tool for communication. By getting nodes in regulated institutions such as banks, but other organizations as well, installed and connected to the network. It's a very good way to discover and overcome any problems or blockers to getting this technology subsequently into production. So it's a very useful way to navigate our own organizations. And that ties into the final point, which is the test network is very much part of our preparation for the raft of production implementations we're seeing coming down the line this year and into next. So what we as a firm and what we as a membership and as a community learn is exactly what will help us make sure that when these production applications roll out very soon, they do so successfully. So we move to the next chart. Here's the map that we track, and each star can actually represent multiple firms, but it's just showing the nodes that we currently have on our members testnet. So this represents and I guess reflects our broad geographically diverse membership. But there are nodes literally around the world, and in many of those stars, as I say, multiple different nodes from multiple different firms, all connected to this single test network. Many of these are nodes that are running applications, but some of them are notaries, the network map, and some of them are oracles. So there really is this general purpose, long-lived, permissioned enterprise blockchain network being built out. And as I say, our intention is to create a version of this for the community to further supercharge this. So my final point is to show where this is going. So if you look on the left-hand side of this chart, which is titled "Deep Dive on Testnet Enable Community," we have the members of R3 who are joining the network, and a large majority of them are already on the test network. But of course, just being able to transact with each other is one thing. But what this also enables us to do, and it's a primary reason why we've opened this call and the broader community up, is because the second half of this story is the partners, both systems integrators and software vendors, and also startups who are building the applications, which can be trialed on the public test network, but also other partners such as market data providers and others who are providing oracles and other services. So I'm really excited by how this is building out and how many different uses we're already seeing for this test network. And I suspect and certainly hope off the back of this call, I'm going to be inundated by requests from the broader community to be first in the queue to be on the community test network when it opens. So to that end, I want to hand over to David Lee from our architecture team to give just a bit more information on the technical underpinnings of this and where it's going.
Thanks, Richard. So what we refer to in a business context as just testnet actually in practice takes the form of several distinct testnet environments which run concurrently whilst reflecting the progression of Corda releases from one milestone to the next. What this allows teams working on to do is to have a degree of flexibility when they are working on a particular version of Corda and to manage their upgrade schedules accordingly. The slide here talks about two testnets, one for Corda M10 and another for Corda M12. We can actually announce that as of yesterday, we also have a Corda M13 testnet. So that will be good news to teams who are looking to upgrade. They now have the option to do so. And anyone joining Testnet from now on will be able to do so on M13 as well. We are looking at demising the M10 version at some point fairly soon, but the current plan is to retain at least the M12 version of Testnet for some time to come and continually manage and upgrade other versions in between. Members with queries about the longevity of any particular Testnet release version should talk to the Testnet support team in the first instance, and we'll be able to give you clarity on that. But regardless of which version, a testnet is effectively defined by the core services which it provides to the network, namely the certificate authority, or the doorman as we refer to it, the network map service, and the notary service. On Testnet, these are all managed by R3, and as Richard said, what this allows participants to Testnet to do is to use these out of the box and focus instead on the implementation of their own Corda nodes. As a participant to Testnet, the implementation of your node is entirely yours to define according to the context and the objectives of your project, and this includes choices such as whether to opt for an on-premise or a cloud-based deployment. For those interested in cloud-based deployments, we do offer to R3 members the option to have a Testnet node provisioned by us at R3 on Azure. This is, however, on the expectation that the resulting node is still yours to configure and to work with as you see fit. We're not providing it on a locked down sort of software as a service type model. The other point to make, as Richard alluded to, is that we very much see Testnet as a gateway for projects to progress to implementation on a production scale. And to that end, we are now in the process of designing and building a production-grade equivalence network. We're using here the term ProdNet very much as a placeholder for now, but it hopefully conveys the objective that this is going to be a network designed to support live commercial transactions between nodes, which are themselves connected to the production infrastructure of the organizations which are running them. And to that end, we are putting significant effort into making sure that this network will satisfy the corresponding expectations around the performance, security, and resilience of those services. The other point being made on this slide is that whilst both the Testnet and the ProdNet essentially offer the same services, ultimately running on the same code, it is not the intention to have nodes running on both networks at the same time. There's been a very deliberate segmentation between these two networks, reflecting very much their different objectives. As Richard said, we are keen to keep the barrier to entry on Testnet very low in order to help projects get up and running and work efficiently on a test basis. Whilst for the production network, we recognize the importance of supporting best practices around, for example, change management, information security, and so on. So it's reasonable to expect that migration from a testnet context to a production net context will involve more formalized processes, which we are in the process of working out and defining. I would expect we'll be in a position to offer more details on the design of the production network in forthcoming sessions of the AWG. But for now, I would like to hand over to Mark Rains from Thomson Reuters, who's going to tell us about the Block 1 IQ Oracle. Mark, you on the line, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to give a brief overview of what we've been working on and give some details of how you can get involved. So, my name is Mark Rains, and I'm one of the developers at TR Labs here. And we've got a number of different blockchain initiatives, and one of those is building an oracle for the Corda network. And we've recently just published that to the Testnet. It's a very experimental stage, I would say. And currently we've made available a number of data sets for use in proof of concept. So currently available we have equity prices, foreign exchange, some interest rates, LIBOR, and even some cryptocurrency prices. I'm not sure how much relevance the latter was for the Corda network, but we're also supporting some other blockchains as well, so there's some relevance there. We're currently available at the moment only on the M10 testnet, although we have already done the work to migrate to M12, and we'll be pushing that to M12 probably today or tomorrow, because I believe M10 is going to be decommissioned in the next day or two. So there's an overview of the Oracle and its capabilities at the Architecture Working Group, and you can see a screenshot of that on the current slide. with details of how to, what's available and how to access it. And there's some sort of more detailed documentation at the Thomson Reuters developer portal. So all of that is available for people to have a look at. If we just flip to the next slide, please. So just to give a very kind of high-level overview of what what comprises the Oracle. I mean, there's three sort of components to it. We have on the left-hand side, on a client node, you have we have a client library, a Kotlin-based client library, which provides the interfaces and types that clients can use to interact with the Oracle. On the right-hand side, we have our own node, which hosts the Oracle service itself, which handles the queries and will sign and return the results which it produces. And then behind that, we have a central system, which is what we call Block 1 IQ, which integrates with both our internal data services and in the case, for example, of cryptocurrencies, some external services as well to provide the responses to the different queries. If we go to the next slide, please. This is just a very high-level kind of view of how it looks. As you can see, this is the client library. There's just a few interfaces and a few classes. We've designed this very simply at the moment. Each query is kind of fairly rigidly defined as a type. For example, you see end of day query there. We also have intraday query and we have an interest rate query. We see that going forward we will probably develop a kind of a lower level API which will be a bit more dynamic and enable you to kind of be a bit more flexible with the queries that you make, and then these specific queries will probably be built on top of that. Alongside that, we also have a flow which we've called the query and sign flow. Couldn't think of a better name, and that's really just the flow that we've devised that you can use to sort of manage the workflow of actually issuing a query and then processing the result. If we can flip to the next slide, please. And then here there's just a very simple example of how you would actually use the query. You create an instance of one of the query classes, and then we get a handle to the Thomson Reuters node, and obviously this is M10 code because it's slightly changed in M12, but I'll update these examples when I get a chance. And then we just build we create a transaction and we create an instance of the query and sign flow, submit all that into that flow, and then you receive the result. You can see at the moment the flow will return you back an instance of what we've called the flow result class, and that's really a kind of an artifact of that this was built prior to when flows would handle exceptions. So I think I do foresee that changing in light of some of the more recent changes to the flow API. But that's about it in total, really. So I think it's very experimental, very simple at the moment. We expect it to change as we get some feedback. One other thing I should mention is that the client library also includes a simulator, an Oracle simulator, so it is possible to sort of run this on a local node or even within the IDE if you would like to kind of experiment and have a little look. So hopefully that will be of use to some people. There are some commercial restrictions and things that need to be taken into consideration, and I would urge anyone that's interested in using this in a project to get in touch with Sam Chadwick here at Thomson Reuters, and he can sort of run through the kind of commercial aspects of using the Oracle. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Mark. Richard here. Just a quick question from me, just looking at this code, because I haven't actually looked at this before. As I look at the query and sign flow, am I right in thinking that what's going on there is that an empty transaction is being sent to your Oracle? It is writing in this case, the end of day value of IBM. It's writing it into, I guess, a command in that transaction and then signing the resulting transaction. Is that what's going on, or is it something else?
Yes, in fact, to tell the truth, Richard, I have actually got a demo here, and I kind of neglected to show you that, but I can quickly show that. It takes 30 seconds, and that will illustrate exactly that point, if you like. If I can
okay, well, why don't we let's give you control. So David's just scrolling up. Who are you logged in as? You logged in as Mark Webb. Is that you?
I'll just have a look.
So while this is going on, I got a quick question. This is Klaus from Bradesco. If you go back to the slide 13, where it shows the architecture of the network, the Oracle is actually, well, the 14, sorry, yeah. The Oracle is actually a node in the network, in your network.
Yes. So that's a node that we're hosting, that's on the testnet. And that includes the service which responds to the queries and will return the results.
Okay, but there is a way to connect to the Oracle directly without interacting with your node or adding your node to my network?
Not at the moment, no. But you need to be on the testnet, and so therefore you need to be able to access that node, which you will be able to, because that node that includes that service is a proper node on the network and is available in the net map.
Yeah, but my question is, like, without thinking in a production environment, your Oracle cannot be a part of my network. It will be just an Oracle that I will access. So is that planned for you guys to implement something like that?
I'm not quite sure.
So actually, Klaus, you've actually touched on a really important point, and maybe this is something we should actually include in the next call, because it ties into the almost exactly the point I was making right at the start of the testnet discussion, which is how do we do everything we can to avoid lots of isolated networks. So if we think about, certainly in the Corda architecture, if we get some data from an Oracle and it's signed, that has value because it was signed by Thomson Reuters, and we know it was Thomson Reuters as opposed to Richard Brown just saying it. And therefore, we need to know that it was Thomson Reuters, and therefore they need to appear in the network map. So the question that immediately raises is, well, if you, in your case, Bradesco, have a collection of nodes running an application, how can they participate, or how can they take advantage of an Oracle run by somebody else? The design of Corda and a lot of the thinking on R3net is how to enable precisely that. And in particular, what I mean is you could have a Bradesco business network where all the nodes are running the appropriate Corda app. You could have a completely separate cache network run by somebody else, but they would all be part of a broader, as we call it, compatibility zone that would then mean you could have addressability between those two domains. So you'd still have within the Bradesco domain control over who's on that business network, who can transact, and all the regulatory obligations upon you can be discharged, and yet the broader set of nodes would be available in the network map if required. I will take an action to talk about that some more, or I'll have Nigel, who's in charge of this, talk about this some more in the next working group call in 2 weeks, because I think this is really, really important.
Richard,
thank you.
I don't know, can you see my screen here? You should see
Yeah, we can. We can see your screen.
Okay, well, I'll just quickly run through that. Now, this is, we've also, as well as the Oracle node, we also have a test node on the current M10 testnet, and we've deployed a very small Corda app to that node, which is what you see before you. And this is just a very, very simple demo of the kind of data that we support, and gives you an opportunity to create a transaction and see it be signed. So I can now create a transaction for one of these symbols which we have available. And if I create, if I do GBP, that's a RIP format. If I click submit now, that will then create a transaction in exactly the process that I just illustrated. And now you see the transaction in front of you, its ID, the timestamp, the notary for that transaction. Now there are no inputs and outputs on this transaction, which is, which is fairly contrived, but it's just to demonstrate the point. But what we do see is that there is a command that's been inserted into that transaction by Thomson Reuters that contains the current current prices that you've requested, and some other information and a timestamp. And then at the bottom we see the public keys of the parties that have signed this transaction. I probably need to resolve these, but I can assure you that one of these public keys is Thomson Reuters, and the other one is the notary, because we've actually finalised that transaction. So, and then there are various. I mean, I can do a Bitcoin transaction here. As I say, I don't know how relevant this is in the Corda world, but it's there anyway. And you can see the current rate there is probably about 10% higher than it was 5 minutes ago. So it's fairly volatile. But yeah, so this really illustrates the sort of general flow, and we hope to sort of build some more sophisticated demonstrations over the coming weeks.
Thank you, Mark. That's really cool. Another quick question from me. Actually, one is, where is your Corda node running? Is that running in AWS as well, or is that on Azure?
Yes, it's in AWS at the moment.
Oh, excellent. Okay, cool. So we actually, I know I should know the answer to this, but that's good to know. So actually, we do have nodes in cloud providers other than Azure as well. So we've shown that degree of that degree of separation as well, which is really cool. So the final question from me, and I guess this is in the docs. An implication of this design is unless the Oracle step is the last step in constructing a transaction, by querying the Oracle and then having the Oracle insert the fact and sign it, the transaction, of course, is frozen at that point. Is it possible to decouple those two things so you can query it, then do extra work on the transaction, and then send it back to the Oracle to say, please sign over this to say that the fact I'm asserting is indeed correct?
Yes, the service itself provides two entry points. One is for the query, and one is for the signing of it. The query and sign flow kind of bundles those together into one process, but it is definitely possible to decouple those, and you know, you might do multiple queries and then get, you know, the last one to be signed, but it will remember the queries, the responses that it has previously issued, and it will sign them if it considers them to be valid.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, great. That's really cool. Thank you, Mark. Does anybody else have any questions? No, cool. Okay, right. Thanks, Mark. I'll give control back to David, and then we will get on to the very last section, and then final Q&A. So, very last slide I wanted to show was just another example of the use of Testnet. And I'm conscious to the very large number of you who've dialed in from the broader community. Right now, this is available only to members. But for those of you, because I see people are still joining throughout the session, for those of you who weren't here at the start, one of the reasons we're showing this is that it's our plan to make available a community and a partner version of Testnet, because the whole point of this is it's more valuable the more people who are on it. So watch this space. So this is an example of use of the Testnet by a firm called HQLAX, a partner of ours with whom we're collaborating on a problem related to making high quality liquid assets easier to deal with amongst large financial institutions. So this is there's not a lot to say in this chart except to point out that the HQLAX technology team are building their solution on Corda and testing it and demonstrating it to their customers on Testnet. And again, as I talk about our plans to move from testing into production this year and next, they're targeting a go live launch next year. So it's just a nice example of how this long-lived general purpose enterprise blockchain infrastructure, that's a mouthful, how such a thing is useful for the broader ecosystem. Okay, so let's get to the last chart, which is any other business. So thanks again to everybody for dialing in. Key point is at the top there. If you're an R3 member and are not yet on any of the R3 member testnets, do email us at testnetsupport@r3.com. If you are not a member, well, obviously we'd love you to become one. But if you're not a member, then also reach out to us, because there will be a community version of the testnet, as I point out, coming soon. So please register your interest. The bulk of discussion about Corda in the community is slack.corda.net. Those of you who are on there will know that's where the development team do their thinking. We do our thinking in public, and you can interact with the whole dev team there. Two other quick points. We're transitioning as much of our support and Q&A over to Stack Overflow. It's just a much nicer environment than what we were using before, and it's just so much easier to find on Google. So if you go to Stack Overflow and search for questions tagged Corda, you'll see there's already a huge amount of questions and answers. There's already a community growing there as well. But we also do retain discourse.corda.net for some of the longer form questions. Okay, so in 2 weeks, there'll be another update from Mike Hearn. M14 will be out by then. I'll be talking about, or rather Nigel will be talking about our vision for how multiple different business networks can coexist, and so that you could have one business network deployed that could access oracles delivered by somebody else. That's a key part of where we're trying to get to. And I think that was they were the key points. So I'll pause one last time for any questions or comments before ending the call. Cool. Okay. So thank you, everybody. For everybody's knowledge, from next fortnight, we will be transitioning the architecture working group to GoToWebinar to enable everybody to participate graphically as well as over the phone. So existing AWG members, look out for a new calendar invitation. It will be a different link you use in 2 weeks' time. So watch out for that. Okay. Thanks, everybody.